All right, hi everyone. Welcome to our Med Mentor Monday on MCAT study tips for summer. We have some incoming MS1s who were accepted to DGSOM and will be starting in the fall. I'm going to let them introduce themselves in just a moment. But first, my name is Julia. I'm an MS2 at DGSOM, and I'm originally from Kentucky, went to school at Emory for undergrad, and then came straight through to DGSOM. All right, Sarah, do you want to start us off with an intro?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah. As Julia said, I'm an incoming M1. I grew up in New York, so I'm crossing the coast, and I went to Columbia for undergrad, and I'm currently just finishing up my master's in public health there as well.
All right, Shannon.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Shannon. I grew up in the Bay Area, as you can see, and I went to Stanford for undergrad and am now finishing my master's degree in epidemiology and clinical research at Stanford. And like Julia said, starting at DGSOM as an MS1 this coming year.
Awesome. Cece, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Cece Cascavita, and I'm an incoming MS1 at DGSOM. I grew up in Riverside, California, before moving to the Bay Area to attend UC Berkeley. Go Bears. And since graduating, I've worked for a biotech company in the Bay Area called Genentech.
All right, and Jennifer.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Gutierrez. I also went to Emory, just like Julia, back in 2019. I grew up in a little small town on the border of Nebraska and Colorado, but I lived in Atlanta for the past 6 years now. I'm currently finishing up a 2-year position as a research assistant at the Marcus Autism Center.
Awesome. We're so grateful to have all of you today. And so we're just going to get started. We have a pretty full agenda all about the MCAT. I know that you guys have lots of questions. So the first topic is going to be on study schedule and resources. So for all of our panelists, what was your study schedule? How did you divide it between content review and practice exams? What resources did you use? How much time did you take to study for the exam? And, looking back, what was most helpful and what do you wish that you had used? So anyone can start.
I can start. So I took my test in September, and so I basically dedicated the summer leading up to that September test date preparing. I was working on my honors thesis at the time, but because it wasn't like a strict work schedule, I was able to do it, at hourly chunks whenever I needed to or wanted to, basically. So I would say I spent about 6 to 7 hours a day studying, depending on the day, over the summer, 6 days a week, I believe. And I try to take a practice test about once a week. It can be really tiring, but you eventually build up that stamina. I remember the first test or the first few tests I took, I really hated it. And then by the time you've taken a few, you get used to it. And it's like training a muscle, just learning how to take a long test like that. So I really recommend just practicing, actually sitting down for the 8 hours, taking that long of a test, because it is tiring mentally and physically. In terms of time division, I at first spent a lot of time doing content review, which I think is one of my biggest regrets, actually, looking back on how I studied. I think I should have started with a bit more also test taking, doing practice questions throughout the week. So that's something I would recommend, is trying to get a feel for the questions and the strategy aspect a bit earlier on your study plan. And then in terms of resources, I use the Princeton Review for the books. I just read those books for content, but then I used a lot of different things online for test prep question stuff. So I bought a couple of exams online. Definitely utilize all of the AMC resources that they have. They have a bunch of question banks and those types of things, and also practice tests. So try to use as much of the AMC stuff as well, because I think it's the most reflective of what you'll actually see on test day.
I can go next. So I definitely agree with everything Shannon said. And one of my biggest regrets is not utilizing the AAMC resources soon enough. So I felt at the end of my studying, I was cramming those resources to try to get them in, and just didn't find them as fruitful because of it. But I did feel that when I took the test, I was like, wow, this is very similar to what was on the AAMC practice stuff, just from memory. But kind of rewinding a little bit, I took about 4.5 months to 5 months to study. I was working full time, And so I tried to space it out a little bit longer. And so I probably studied starting probably in April or May, and then took the exam in August. Wait, February, March, I started studying actually. And I probably dedicated about 2 to 4 hours a night studying after work, which is not ideal, but I think starting a little bit earlier, it kind of gives you more time to fine tune how you study. And then similarly, I spent a lot of time on content review, probably about a month and a half to 2 months, and then started doing a lot more practice tests and practice questions. And so I wish I would have started that a little bit sooner. One thing that I do recommend, and that really helped me at least, is that I would, before work or before kind of starting my day, I would read the CARS passages as kind of for fun and as a way to practice. And so I would do about 3 passages in the morning, timed, kind of like over coffee. And that really made me comfortable reading a wide array of things, as well as just comfortable early in the morning, because that section tends to be at the onset of the day. And so just getting comfortable doing that, it was like muscle memory. And so I think I enjoyed it, doing it that way, and it made me well prepared for the exam. And then some of the resources that I used were similarly Princeton Review. I also love and swear by this was the Khan Academy notes that you can find, like the 300-page thing for psych and soc. That thing is golden. Or there's also a condensed version that's like 100 pages. And so that thing, probably like 3 days before, I like crammed it and just read it all the way through, and that was super helpful.
I can go next. So I was obviously a full-time student, and I was about to graduate as well. And then into the summer, I was working full-time. So for me, it was like I had to balance studying for the MCAT along with anything full-time. So I started studying around March, and I took the exam in September, and actually took it more than once as well, just because at one point I was like, I'm not ready for this. I avoided it and then retook it. But so because of my crazy schedule, I would actually get out of school and all my classes and labs and everything around 4, and I would study until 10, like up until I graduated. So that was really, really tough, especially because all my friends were, out having a good time and enjoying their last semester, and I really wasn't. But I kind of, going along what Shannon said, like taking those practice questions early on, I signed up for a lot of free resources. Like there's a whole bunch of free resources that you can just Google and say free practice questions for the MCAT, and they'll email you a question every single day in the morning. And I used to do that. I used to do the same thing, like right before work. During the summer, I would take those. And I use Kaplan, I use their books, and I did take a class, just like a regular class, and I didn't find it helpful at all. Like it was an in-person, I didn't like it. I studied better on my own. So once I figured that out, I just made my own schedule. I did all the content review that I had to do. And then I would take probably a full length once every month up until it was getting closer to my dates. And then I would take it every week, and then dedicate specific days to review every section that I took. And then one thing that I also found really helpful is that CARS was my weakest section. And so every night before bed, I would practice CARS sections that Khan Academy has, because Khan Academy has a whole bunch of practice questions in all the subjects, but I specifically use the CARS a little bit more. And then if you're like into podcasts, so like I'm very much a visual learner, so I was kind of like trying to pick at all my weaknesses. That way I could do better on those. And I would listen to podcasts. It was like The Prospective Doctor or something like that. They go through full length exams, like in every subject. And they'll go through it and they'll read it to you and everything. So it kind of made me think about the questions a little differently. And that really, really helped. So I felt like a lot more confident going in there, especially because I was a little worried about, I had studied for such a long period of time that by the time I did take the MCAT, I was just worried of burnout.
I can chime in here. So I did slightly different things than everyone else, but I think that really just speaks to the diversity of study strategies that are out there, and how important it is to really find the resources that work for you. The number one tip I would say is be flexible. If something's not working, change it. Sorry for the honking noise. So what I did is I actually started with Kaplan as content review. I kind of looked at Kaplan books as like the Goldilocks of MCAT books. They gave you like a really good foundation in content. They didn't go too much into detail, but they really gave you kind of the starting push. I used an Anki deck actually, and I know we're going to be talking about spaced repetition and Anki a little bit later today, but I used an Anki deck based on the Kaplan books that I found on MCAT Reddit of all places. And I would basically go through a chapter of Kaplan, go through the Anki deck, and really just solidify my understanding that way. I would also recommend a resource called UWorld. UWorld is amazing. And what I loved most about UWorld is, well, it's really two things. The first is the practice questions are very much in line with the style of AAMC. You know, so other like test prep companies might have slightly different wording or phrasing, but I felt UWorld was very much aligned. But really the best benefit of UWorld is the explanation. So every question comes with these beautiful kind of textbook style explanations that go above and beyond the content of the question. And I would essentially go through those explanations and learn and make my own kind of flashcards or Anki cards based on that. I know people really emphasize the test taking, kind of the strategy portion of the MCAT, but I would also really encourage you not to lose sight of content, because there is a huge amount of content that's covered. And, you know, there are questions that you can get out of this with test taking, but you really do need to have that foundation going in. In terms of exams, I agree with a lot of previous people. It's really important to just get in there, like start testing. Don't be afraid to get things wrong. And the sooner you can start practicing that kind of that grueling siege, the more comfortable you will be by the end. I used, I think it's called Blueprint now. It used to be called Next Step, but I used the first 3 exams that they offer as practice exams. I love them because they were, with the exception of their cars section, which is not the greatest. I thought that their exams are really, you know, reflective of kind of real MCAT style. And they also had really wonderful explanations for every question, which I think is a great learning opportunity. And then finally, you know, kind of as a general point, there are many resources online that will kind of allow you to watch videos or to, you know, to maybe take a class. All of those things are great because, you know, if that's how you learn, that's how you learn, but make sure you're learning actively. You know, the way I would approach this is think about the types of subjects or questions you would least like to find on the MCAT, and then study those until they're your best subjects. And then finally, one last point, I see someone posted a question about CARS passages, and CC mentioned the Next Step CARS books. I also wanted to mention Jack Weston has free CARS passages online. I use those as extra practice in addition to the UWorld CARS passages, and really thought that they helped me.
Great, that's super helpful. And like Sarah said, everyone has different study styles. You really just have to find what works for you. Since we have some time before the next section, I can share a little bit about what I did, which was similar and different. And I felt like a lot of kids at Emory were using the Kaplan books. So I actually just bought them from a student who was a year older than me and used those for content review. And then like a lot of us here, really relied on the AAMC practice exams, their question banks, really anything they had to offer, I purchased. And be sure to check out the AAMC Fee Assistance Program, which is for students in a certain income range for your family. That's great. It can give you discounts on AAMC practice test resources and also MCAT registration and also med school app registration. So be sure to check that out. That's free to apply and available to anyone who is who qualifies. And I'm a big study guide person, so I use the AAMC content outline on their website and really just spent a lot of time going through each thing on the list. If it looked familiar to me, if I felt confident about it, I spent less time on it. But if I was unsure, I'd look back at school notes, especially biochem. The Khan Academy videos were great, although I heard that they're transitioning to being, I guess, affiliated with AAMC. So not sure what that will look like for you all, but hopefully they're still accessible and still because they're a great resource. But yeah, and then towards the end, just practice. A lot of MCAT is just knowing how the test works and kind of getting in the mindset of those question writers. Yeah, and it's more than fine to take the test more than once. That's a huge med school myth that we've talked about at a lot of med school panels, but it's totally fine to take it again if the first time is not the score you want. Okay, I think we'll go to our next topic, which is just about MCAT strategy. So this is asking about, what types of techniques do you use when you learn to memorize facts? Do you like flashcards? Do you like questions? Do you like study guides? And then what kind of strategies did you use during the exam to manage your time or read fast? We've had a lot of questions about that. And is there anything that you wish you knew about the test, like the day of the test, that you learned after taking it that would have been useful?
I can go first. So when I was taking all my practice exams, I found it really useful to have like a sticky note with, and then if there was something that I felt, oh, I should have studied this more, or I don't know this at all, I would write it down. That way I knew what I didn't know. And so that was like a big part of it too. And I used a whole bunch of things. I mean, for psych and social, I used flashcards. That was just how I memorized it, because I only took a few classes of those. I was a chemistry major, so chemistry was my best subject. So I feel for that, I was just really good about writing things. I had a whiteboard and I would just rewrite things over and over again. Like I mentioned for cars, I did a whole bunch of practice at night, and I would, on my drive to school, I would listen to it, as a podcast. I feel like I had to really learn how I worked best with different subjects, because they are all so different and you can't study them all the exact same way. You just can't. So find out what works best for you, even if it's a whole bunch of different methods, because that's what worked best for me. And you'll get to, once you're studying for that, you'll see, okay, well, this isn't working for me. I'm not learning this. Or if you're taking a section and your score isn't improving, then this is the time to experiment with different study methods if you haven't been able to figure that out before. And that was the case for me. And to answer your last part of the question, I wish that I had known that it's okay not to have a perfect score, or to even like reach that score that you have in your mind. It is completely okay, because when med schools look at you, they're not looking at just your med score or your MCAT score or your GPA. They're not just looking at that. They're looking at you holistically. So if you're an applicant like I was, where I was working 3 jobs during the entire thing, I was in a research lab, I was doing volunteer work, I had a full schedule, I had so many other obligations and responsibilities and so many other things that I was passionate about, not just studies. I was a whole person, not just a student. I wore a lot of different hats. And so I felt like that put a lot more weight on my application than just an MCAT score did. So I think it's really important to remind yourself of that it's not the biggest deal if you don't get the perfect score. Don't put so much pressure on yourself, because it will get at you mentally.
I can speak a little bit to the exam time management. I think I can echo everything regarding the memorization. Everyone needs to figure out on their own what works best for them, because I was personally a very like visual learner, so I like being able to rewrite things or make my own little condensed study sheet. So I did that a lot. But in terms of the time management within the test, I think becoming comfortable with sections is the most important thing, because you have to figure out your own way to manage that time. Some people like to read a little bit faster, or like have a certain time per question. But for me, I didn't like looking at the clock so much, because it made me more stressed out. So I think just taking more and more practice sections and then evaluating it afterwards and seeing, okay, what did I feel like I was rushed on? Where do I need to, improve, essentially, so that you can figure out where you're uncomfortable and then work on those areas. And one thing that I would really recommend is, after taking a section or a practice exam, try to review it as soon as possible afterwards, because I found oftentimes if I waited even a day or two, especially with cars, it would be really hard for me to actually remember what happened when I was taking it. And that was hard for me to actually then learn from that experience. So if you have the time, maybe that evening, to at least review some of the sections where maybe you struggled the most, that might be most beneficial to learn, okay, did I feel rushed in this part, or was this question something that I spent too much time on? And you get a better feel for that if you do it sooner rather than later. And then what I wish I knew about the test, I would say, is the environment itself is a little bit like scary, going into an environment where you don't know. And so I wish I had gone to the test center maybe like the day before, to make sure I knew where I was going, maybe try to make myself as comfortable as possible. So that way on the day of the exam, you're as confident as humanly possible that you're like, okay, I know I'm going to be on time. I have my food ready to go. Okay, I'm going to be hydrated. And also get a feel for how long are your breaks, because sometimes you won't necessarily have a clock readily available to you to be like, okay, I have 10 minutes here. So just try to take the practice tests in a setting that might emulate where your test center will be so that you get comfortable in that setting. So just practice like it's the real thing as much as possible so that you feel confident when you actually do it.
I can jump in here. So as I mentioned earlier, one of kind of the big ways that I studied was using Anki, which is a free online, essentially like a flashcard program that is all about spaced repetition. Although I did not actually use the spaced repetition part of it, my big goal with Anki and really just kind of those cards in general was just trying to kind of get out of my own head and figure out what the gaps in my own knowledge where they were. And even if you don't use Anki, right, or flashcards in general, I would recommend like try to just figure out how to talk yourself through the material, figure out what you don't know. You know, it's easy to read a passage and say, oh, I know that, you know, but when you're then asked a question about it in detail, you might not actually know the answer as clearly or as I think maybe in depth as you might need. And so something that I always like to do, even when I'm studying for non-MCAT exams, is just talk yourself through it, right? So if you are asked a question or if you're prompted with a theory or a term, like you should be able to kind of vocalize the answer. And that for me was a way of just really forcing myself to understand, oh, I knew something relatively consistently versus this was a topic I needed to review, I needed to watch a video on, I needed to kind of, you know, boost my own knowledge in. I also think another kind of strategy that I used was, as I think, as Shannon mentioned, was just, you know, when you take practice exams, take them like for real. You know, don't play with your phone during breaks. Don't eat or drink if you wouldn't normally do that in a real testing environment. Like really try to emulate that test because, you know, you're going, when you go to the test center, it's a different environment. It's a little scary. But if you kind of have that routine, you just kind of, you know, it's almost muscle memory, but not really that. You know, you snap into what you've established as a habit and it makes sense. What I will say, I echo the breaks comment. The breaks go a lot faster than you think. And the other thing that I will say is, you know, a big part of why it's important to take practice tests is to figure out what you don't know and cover that ground. But the double AMC exams are also very predictive of your score. And so, you know, other exams, other test prep companies might not be predictive, but the double AMC tests are highly correlated with the score that many people ultimately get on their exam. And you have to go in with full confidence and trust when you take that exam that you've studied what you can study, you know what you know, and it's just time to execute on it. When I walked out of my MCAT, I felt really not confident in my score. I didn't feel confident in myself. I was like almost melting down. It was a rough time, right? And I would say, you know, I'm sure we all go through feelings like that at some point coming out of the test, but have confidence in yourself because, you know, when you finally go in to take that exam, you're ready for it, you've prepped yourself, and like you just have to have faith that you are doing what you can do to get the score that you can get.
I don't think I personally have much to add in terms of how I would prepare or how I prepared. I think everybody covered that really well, and it's very individualistic. What may work for me might not work for everyone else, and so I think that's something that is you have to be flexible in adjusting how you learn and across the different sections because they're all different. I think one thing that I want to highlight, or actually two things that I realized when I went into the test center is one, when I was practicing, I used silicone ear plugs that are malleable to your ear. When I went to the test center, they just have like those foam ones that you kind of squish and put in. I was very uncomfortable when I was taking the real thing because I wasn't used to those foam earplug things. And so I would just kind of do your research in terms of maybe what your test center uses. I think they all use the foam ones. And so just really cater your studying to that as opposed to getting used to maybe something a little bit more comfortable and realizing that that's not going to be offered to you the day of. That also kind of goes in line with the second point is that when I was taking practice tests, I used pen and paper. In the test center, you get kind of like this dry erase marker and this like laminated board. And it flips like upwards from what I remember. And so I was not accustomed to that because I was kind of used to a paper that I could flip back and forth and like look at my notes and stuff. And so maybe if you could look online and see if you're able to obtain one of those, it might help your test taking and really allow yourself to fully mimic the testing environment.
Yeah, I would echo that. Actually, I think you can get them off Amazon, like Google it, and you'll find they have them. And then also, most of the test centers have a keyboard and a mouse, like a menu. I don't know how to describe them, but not a laptop, right? So I would try to take my tests in that exact setup too, just to like get comfortable with the way that it would be at the test center. So anything that you can do to control the test taking environment, I would definitely recommend doing that.
Yeah, those are great points. I think you can be like prepared with the content, but something as simple as like, I don't know, your earplugs or like the writing utensil you're using can kind of throw you off. And it definitely, I had some moments where they gave me like full on headphones for my test center, and I ended up getting a headache in the middle. I'm not saying this to scare you, but like bring Advil, keep it in your locker, bring water. You get like an hour long lunch break. Take all the breaks you need. There's no reason you need to be skipping breaks to rush out. Like just take your time. And yeah, like I actually watched a video, I think on the Prometric test site or whatever the testing center is, and saw that they use the whiteboard things. And then I just got a sheet protector like for your binder that's kind of laminated. And I would just practice on that. I'd put a piece of paper in there and use a dry erase marker, and it helped because then nothing like really threw me on the test day. It's silly stuff, but you just gotta like be your own best advocate, your own best cheerleader, and set yourself up for success. And on the day of the test, like even the day before, try not to review things or stress yourself out. You know, just kind of relax, watch a show, like get to bed early, get a good breakfast, and just play some hype music like going into the exam. That's what I did. And you know, it worked out. But I will say, like Sarah was saying, I finished the test and I thought I completely failed it. So no matter what you get, you probably will feel terrible after the test. So don't let that get in your head. The waiting period is almost as difficult as the lead up to the exam. So just try to relax as much as possible. Try to distract yourself and celebrate when you're done, because that's an accomplishment. All right, we're going to move on to the next section, which is all about time management. Some of the panelists mentioned that they were working while they were studying, or they were in school while they were studying. We got a lot of questions about how you really were able to balance that and also stay sane. So, you know, how did you all prevent burnout? How did you take breaks and make time for your mental health during this time? And were you able to do other things outside of studying?
So as I mentioned, I worked as I studied. One thing that I really enjoyed and is my best friend is Google Calendar. So I would schedule out times that I was going to study or times that I was going to do other things, and really stick to those time blocks, because it helped me how much time I was spending on each section. And if I maybe had gaps, because I tend to study things that I enjoy. So maybe like the biology, and I would neglect physics and stuff. And so I would look back at my calendar and realize I haven't studied physics in 2 weeks or done really practice questions for them. And so I think that's something that I personally used. And it also allowed me to keep track of my work stuff as well. So I use my work calendar as well, like in addition to as like a personal calendar. And so it allowed me to really gauge how much time I need outside of work for works things as well. One thing that I like to do is that I like to reserve probably Sunday afternoon or like afternoons as like personal time where I would plan stuff with friends. This was obviously pre-COVID. And I would really allow that time to kind of socialize and do kind of more things outside of my house, because I found that I was spending a lot of time indoors. And so I also scheduled that time in advance because I really wanted to honor it and make sure that I gave myself kind of grace and time for emotional kind of wellness. And so I would highly recommend that. I also think sometimes you realize that as you're studying and as time goes on, you might not be as productive, and you might just be sitting there kind of allowing the hours to tick by. And when I would hit that point, I would just stop, because I realized that my studying wasn't being as productive, and I might as well just kind of watch TV or hang out if I wasn't really getting the quality of time that I needed from what I was dedicating. And so I would just really kind of shut everything off and kind of take that break if I needed to. And so I would just be cognizant of how you're feeling and take the breaks that you need to. Just give yourself grace. And at the end of the day, I think one thing that I realized is I took my test in August. I was originally supposed to take it in July, but I realized I just wasn't ready by that point. And so I pushed it out a bit more just to give myself a little bit more time. And I also utilized PTO to study. So about a week before, I took a vacation, a whole vacation week, so I could just really dedicate to studying and fine tuning the stuff that I needed to.
Yeah, Cece had a great point, which was I was also going to bring up. I also pushed my test date back, which was a hard decision to make because, you know, when you're studying and everything is intense and hard, right? It's easy to kind of want to get things over with. But at the end of the day, the MCAT is a big opportunity to show what you can really do. And I think it's important to be brutally honest with yourself about where you are in the process, what things are working for you, how much material you still have left to do. And if that means you end up pushing your date back rather than rushing into it before you're ready, you know, that means you end up pushing your date back, and that is okay. I think I also really loved the idea of a schedule. I used Google Sheets to basically create a schedule for my summer and charted out, you know, at the beginning of every week what I wanted to do and kind of the beginning of the summer what my overall goals were. But you also have to be flexible because sometimes things might take longer, sometimes things might take a shorter amount of time. Sometimes you might discover like, wow, I really know nothing about like meiosis, right? And it's time to kind of put things on hold and learn all of meiosis. Just me, okay. But you know, I think it's really important to be adaptive and flexible about all of this. I was working as a teaching assistant at the time, so I was teaching a lab course virtually about 4 or 5 hours twice a week and 2 hours or 3 hours the rest of the days. It was nice to have time apart from studying. At the same time, you have to be really careful, right? Because you need to build in time to study when you're focused and when you're really ready to kind of absorb that material and work hard. And it's tough to let those distractions, or it's tough not to let those distractions really bother you. So again, I think it's just really important to be honest with yourself, what's working, what's not working, and just kind of keep that goal in mind throughout all of this kind of balancing act.
Yeah, I would really echo the scheduling or like making a plan early on in the summer and then being flexible with if that changes, like Sarah said. I originally planned out my day so that I would do my research in the morning and then study for the majority of the midday afternoon. And then I eventually realized that I hit a lull in the afternoon. I didn't want to keep studying basically. So I figured out how to do maybe early morning studying, do some research in the middle, then do more studying later on. I felt like breaking it up was better for me. So being flexible once you've created that schedule, know that it could change for sure. And then give yourself enough break time. Definitely is important. You can burn yourself out really easily studying for the MCAT. So I would always protect 1 day a week to be able to not think about it and do something that I enjoyed. And I also made sure that I was working out enough during the week. And I know that's something that personally I can let slip because when you're stressed and you think, obviously you have a lot of things pulling you in different directions, and it can be easy to just drop something that you might think, oh, okay, today I can not do that, but then it accumulates over time. So if that's something, working out is important to you or whatever it may be, make sure you find time every day, not just that 1 day a week, to actually do something that makes you happy and will allow you to continue studying for all of the time that you've committed to or plan to commit to studying. So I would really emphasize every single day scheduling something that's fun, to take a break and allow yourself to actually unplug from all the studying that's going on.
Yeah, and kind of going off of that, it's just, practice mindfulness too. I think that that's become very popular, like recently, especially with the pandemic, just taking care of your mental health. But when you're working out, work out and only focus about that. When you're eating, do that unless, you want to eat while you're studying. I personally didn't, I just took breaks. But whatever it is that you're doing, just focus on that. Because if you're eating or if you're in the lab or even during class and you're thinking about the MCAT, then you're just stressed, and then you're going to be thinking about the MCAT the entire time, and you're gonna wonder, like, wow, I feel like I've been studying for the MCAT all day. So really take that time. And personally, like, I I absolutely love working out, and that's like my me time. And I would get up at like 6:30 in the morning just to get it done because I had classes all day. And then I knew that I had scheduled like 6 hours in the afternoon to study. And so I looked forward to getting up in the morning, even though it was really hard. You had to do it because it was my time. And sometimes, like kind of like everyone said, um, it's okay if you don't get everything done that you wanted to get done. And normally I would schedule that in for like a Thursday. I'd be like, okay, I'm gonna have like 3 hours here where if I didn't get things done, then that's what I'm gonna do and gonna finish it up. And if not, then I know that I have 3 hours for some practice questions for cars or whatever it may be. And I also relied a lot on my friends. I felt like on Friday night specifically, like while some people were going out, like I knew that I had one friend that would stay in with me and we would watch a movie at like 8 o'clock or whatever because I study, I would give myself like a break. I would finish studying early and we would watch a movie. And I felt like having people there with me during my breaks really helped me appreciate them rather than taking that time just to myself because then I just feel alone. So I felt like I had some really good friends that really supported me through that because they knew that I was going through a really tough time just studying all the time.
All right, that's great. Thank you all. At this time, if you guys have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. I know we've been responding, but we can open the floor up for an open Q&A. Try to stick to MCAT theme stuff. If you guys have other questions, you can always submit them to our Ask the Med Mentors forum. I'll send the link in the chat for that. Yeah, we'll just wait for some questions.
While we wait,
Sorry, Shannon, you go.
Okay, I wanted to echo the point about, or not necessarily a point about sleep schedule, but it seemed like, waking up early to work out was part of a schedule. But I do think that making sure that you're getting enough sleep is not often emphasized enough. And I was the most strict I had ever been about sleep that summer when I was studying. And I think that's one of the biggest pros out of anything that I learned from that summer. The exam is relatively early and I'm not a morning person by any means. So I actually went to bed on time and woke up early in the morning every day for I think it was a few months leading up to the exam. And I was so thankful that I did that. And I really respected my sleep, even though I normally do not do that. So I would really recommend as much as possible trying to set a consistent sleep schedule so that you feel fresh and ready to tackle this 8-hour test on test day.
There was a question in the Q&A that I thought was really important. I wanted to bring it up. And this person asked if we ever had doubts that this pathway was right for us. And if so, how did you manage or overcome those doubts? And I just want to say imposter syndrome is very real. And I know I probably speak for all of us when I say that we have all questioned things and doubted where we are and why we're doing this and if we're right for this, right? And that is so like just 100% human. And I think also like if you are doubting yourself, right, that also shows that you are being reflective and you're thinking through things, but you also might, I think this might also be a sign where it's important to have a support network. It's important to have people who care for you outside of this world. And for me, whenever I kind of got into that headspace or started thinking about, just really questioning everything and going down that spiral, it's really important to say, hey, like, let's step back. Let's kind of do something to clear our head. Maybe to go for a run, take a walk, spend time with your family or your friends, like watch an episode of something, and then come back to whatever you're working on, with a little bit more clarity, because this is really hard. Anyone who tells you that studying for the MCAT is not hard is lying to themselves. This entire process is hard. Every part of this is challenging. You can 100% do it. But yes, I think, doubting yourself is normal. It's just, you can 100% overcome those doubts too. I'm unsure if anyone else wanted to jump in there, but I'll throw it out there.
I definitely think that is true, especially as you take your diagnostic test or the first few tests. If you do not score anywhere near where you want to be, it's very easy to fall into the mindset of like, is this the right thing? Am I smart am I smart enough to pursue this avenue of things? And I think it's really important to ground yourself that you're just starting and be cognizant that it's a marathon, not a sprint, and that you need to have grace with the learning process and just learn how to take this test. It's not something that comes naturally to a lot of people. And so I think being able to just kind of center yourself and be mindful of that, because at the onset, it might be scary to even take these tests because you don't feel prepared, to be honest. I think when I took my first diagnostic, I scored very poorly. And I kind of had to remind myself that I was just starting and that I wasn't where I needed to be, and that it's okay to learn as I go. And so I think just being mindful of that and realizing that a lot of people do have these thoughts. It's not something that is unique to you, but it's something that's very common, even if people don't necessarily speak about it as often. And even though you see people's N score that's really high, it obviously they put in a lot of work to get there, and it might not have been the initial score that they got on their diagnostic. And so just be okay with maybe realizing that it's a process, and as long as you're improving along the way, then it's okay to maybe start off a little bit lower than you would want to.
I also think that it's really important to change the mindset that you have, because if you're studying and you're thinking to yourself, oh, this sucks, or I hate organic chemistry, or I hate this and that, then you're probably not going to do very well on it. You're probably not going to study it as thoroughly as you would have if you had a different mindset and you said to yourself, like, okay, this is long, but here we go. You know, I can do this a little bit at a time. And if you have fun with it and actually have fun with learning, because you're not going to know everything that's on the MCAT. You're just not, you're going to have to teach yourself some things. And if you have fun with it, and I mean, I know you're not going to be like, yay, I'm going to take an 8-hour exam, but while you're studying for it, you know, and make things fun, like have gummy bears. And every time you finish a section, like, you know, you eat a couple gummy bears, or get yourself a treat, or whatever it may be, like make it fun for yourself. That way it's a little bit more bearable, and you have that drive to keep going tomorrow and the next day and the next day.
All right, I think another popular question we've been getting is just about getting the right MCAT score, or getting an MCAT score like within the average of your med school that you're applying to. I guess like I don't want to go totally into the med school application topic, but when you were trying to think of like what schools to apply for, how did your MCAT factor in, and how important do you think it really is?
Yeah, I would say I set my target MCAT score based on the schools that I knew were like dreams that I wanted to go to. And I think it was answered in the Q&A as well, but I would use MSAR as your go-to resource to see what are the averages. And I don't think by any means you need to necessarily get the school's average to be a competitive applicant, but I do think it's just helpful to have that as a sort of target for yourself. And I definitely applied to schools that had MCAT scores that had averages that were higher than mine. And I don't think it's a limiting factor by any means, but there's also a part of MSAR where it has, I think it's the 25th to 75th percentile. And I kind of use that as a gauge of, okay, where is it more realistic for me to apply in a sense? I do think that there's also such thing as applying to a school that maybe has a lower MCAT score, and maybe you won't be looked at as seriously on that spectrum as well. That band of that range of MCAT scores as an indicator, but not as a means to say you apply to a school if you're not in that band. It was just the majority, or maybe 3/4 of the schools that I did apply to fell within that range. And I also wanted to address, there was one question about retaking the exam, and I actually considered retaking it because I wasn't upset, but I wasn't like super happy with my score. And I do think that's a difficult decision. I would consult mentors and people who are professors at your university, or people that you trust from the side of maybe admissions, or just medical advisors at your school. And I would say that, again, to the point of, you don't have to have the school's mean, and you also don't have to rely on an MCAT as the only means of getting into a school. You're much more of an applicant than your scores or your GPA. So I wouldn't let a score that you're maybe disappointed with be something that debilitates you and makes you necessarily fear that you can't get in anywhere or where you want to be. And I also think that restudying for a test, you might not actually get a better score. After all, like if you just know you're not a great standardized test taker, that's a high risk to go and spend maybe months and months of time studying for a test that you might not necessarily do a lot better on. So weigh your options given how much time and resources you can commit to studying more. And also if you really think that the payoff will have a significant impact on your life happiness, because there's a lot of other things that you can do to strengthen your application by doing research, volunteering, doing something that you really care about, and not just retaking a test because you don't think it's the right score. So those are my thoughts on those questions.
Going
I
off of
think
that,
Shan-
it's
sorry, go.
Oh, sorry. It's completely okay to take gap years. Like if that's not in your initial plan, that's okay. I mean, I was planning on taking one gap year and then I ended up taking 2 gap years. And during that time, I feel like that was such a crucial part to my application because I matured as a person. I got more experience, both clinical and with service related things. So it's totally okay to take that gap year. And like Shannon said, like if you're willing to kind of to go a little bit further and keep studying for that, and do so if you think that you can do it. But if you can't, if you're just, you know, I can't do it, it was really hard that first time, then it's okay, and go with it, go with what you have and just really make the best of it. But it's okay. I mean, whatever it is, like it's your path, and like it's cliche, but like no one path is direct. Everyone's path is going to be different. And when med schools ask you like, what happened here? Why'd you take a gap year? That's your time to be like, yeah, you know what? I wanted to do this, this, and this. And I wanted to be, you know, a better applicant. I wanted more service. I wanted to improve my score. So I took the MCAT again, whatever it may be. It's your story. So do whatever it is that you're going to be passionate about and what you're happy with, because at the end of the day, it is your score. It is your application.
The only thing that I would add to both, because I completely agree with so much that's been said before, when you look at the MSAR, and I know Julia dropped the link in the chat, you'll see that a lot of med schools have very similar like median GPAs. Like the median GPAs all are kind of in the same, you know, boat. That doesn't say, by the way, if your GPA is outside of that range, you are not competitive, right? It definitely doesn't say that. But in terms of median GPA, they're all kind of relatively similar. The MCATs are quite different depending on the school. And so I would venture to say the MCAT is important, and it is a big part of your application. But it's only a part, you know, so it's something that you can control in this process that might seem like a black box sometimes, but it's just one part of the story that you're telling to med schools.
I think I had a little bit of a different approach as to using MSAR. I actually didn't focus as much on the MCAT and GPA because mine are below the cutoff, especially for the GPA aspect of things. And so I really relied on kind of what else I brought to the table and the experiences that I had, and more so of the holistic aspect of things. One thing that I would recommend too is if you have questions about your MCAT or even GPA, is that they do have admissions fair or like fairs with these medical schools. I think MCAS just had one, and they have them at other schools. They host these like virtual conferences or in person, and the admissions people go there. And to me, I went to one of those and actually spoke to someone at a UC, and I kind of put my cards on the table, like, this is what I have. Would that be sufficient for this school? And they said yes. And so I think being able to reach out to schools if you do not fall and see if there is still something that they will consider. There is a document on AMCAS that says specific cutoffs that some schools may have. I think Julia mentioned that at Emory you have to have a 500 or something for them to even offer you an interview. And there are schools that have these specific cutoffs as an overall score as well as subsection scores. So if you score below a certain number, I think it's like a 124 at certain schools, that in one section, they won't look at your application. So you kind of don't pass that filter. I have heard of people reaching out to schools and saying if they would look at them individually. And so I think it's worth a shot to ask if that happens, and you know that you fall out of their automatic cutoff, because that is just an algorithm that screens people out. And so definitely reach out to schools. I think you can be you are your strongest advocate. No one's going to advocate for you if it's not yourself. And so I think that's the advice that I would give if you do not feel that your numbers are within range. But also reach out to students and see kind of what are scores that they do accept, because it's only a median and it's only an average. Like there are a range of scores that get accepted.
To add on to that, not every med school is going to be the same, and you shouldn't just be applying to med schools because they're highly ranked. I feel like every med school has their own like kind of their own direction that they want to go with, and a lot of them are the same. But if you are really into primary care, then you're going to be applying to those schools and those programs, right? So they might accept you even with lower stats, even with a lower MCAT score, versus someone else who really doesn't want to do primary care, but they just apply to that program anyways. So focus more on the med school and where you want to be, rather than, do I fit into, this range? Because I'll be honest, like when I applied to DGSOM, for me, it was a reach school, and I was like super excited about it. And that's what I did in my interview. I just kind of sold myself, and I'm like, this is what I have, and I'm really excited about this. And, and I addressed that, my GPA was like, okay, my MCAT was okay, but this is what else I have. And, and then I got accepted. So it's also what the med school is looking for specifically. So don't just put yourself as a number. Think of yourself as a person, what you have to offer, and how your goals align with the school's mission.
All right, thanks everybody for sharing. I just want to clarify for those watching at home, the MSAR is a medical school admissions requirement database put on by the AAMC. I think you do have to pay for it unless you're a part of the fee assistance program. So definitely go to the AAMC website. They have tons of like frequently asked questions sections, really everything you need to know about scheduling your MCAT test date, fees for canceling or rescheduling. That should be your primary resource when you're looking towards like the logistical things about the MCAT. But the MSAR is a great resource. It has averages for MCATs of all the medical schools. It has some other demographic information. And it's kind of a nice way to make your school list when you get to that point. All right, on that note, I think we're going to close off the session, but so glad to have had you all and so excited you're starting at DGSOM, these incoming MS1s. Congratulations. And soon enough, I'm sure the people watching will also be accepted to medical school. So thanks again for watching these Med Mentors sessions. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Med Mentors UCLA. And I'll end it on that.